So today we're going to be talking about 14.5-inch 6.5 Creedmor and the theory behind it. Now, to some of you that is probably going to sound like a contradiction in terms, and to the rest of you, well, it's an interesting concept and something that I've been exploring lately. Now, something that this video won't be is a build video. As it stands right now, some of these parts I like quite a bit, and some of them I'm not so fond of. Now, the heart and soul of this build is a 14.5-inch Deadshot custom barrel that has a custom profile and everything else that I spec'd out about it. That's the part that's staying, and the rest of it, well, we'll see. Now, the ammo sponsor of the channel and the build series, that's going to be Callaway Ballistics. I did use a lot of their 6.5 Creedmor to shoot out to 930 yards so far in this video. I was having some issues with their 6.5 Creedmor in this gas gun, but we're working through the issues. So again, if you want to check them out, go ahead and use code FOCUS, save yourself some money. Now, most of the time when you think of a battle rifle, you probably think of something between 16 and 20 inches long, chambered in .308, and something that is useful for putting a heavier bullet onto target at somewhere in between 0 and, let's say, 800 yards. When you think of a 6.5 Creedmor build, usually you're thinking of maybe a bolt gun or a semi-auto gas gun, something that is more designed for long range, so let's say 600 to 1,000, 1,200 yards, something in that range. However, what I'm doing here is trying to get the best of both worlds, the shortest, most competent package that can still reach out to extended ranges and outperforms .308 in basically every way. Geisley is set to release their 14.5-inch 6.5 Creedmor. LMT already has theirs out. Both of them call it the MRGG, the mid-range gas gun, but what I'm going to propose here is that it is the ARGG, the all-range gas gun. Now, the most contentious part of this build is undoubtedly going to be the length. 14.5 inches in 6.5 Creedmor is going to sound way too short for some of you out there that are used to seeing builds in this caliber at around 18 to 24 inches to get the most velocity possible. However, that is not the point of this build. This is not to make the most effective 6.5 Creedmor build. This is to get the most effective, useful length in a gas gun. Now, to make the point a little bit more clear, we're going to compare and contrast a 14.5-inch 6.5 Creedmor versus a 20 or even 22-inch .308, and we're going to see that the 6.5 Creedmor, in some circumstances, even though it's 7.5 inches shorter and lighter and less recoiling, but we'll get into all of that in just a minute, matches or outperforms its longer, older brother. Now, for all of the data that I'm going to be using here, I'm going to be pulling it from rifleshooter.com, plus some of my own personal extrapolation and first-hand experience using my 14.5-inch 6.5 Creedmor. Now, starting off with the 6.5 Creedmor with a Hornady 120 grain AMAX bullet, which is a little bit light for caliber. Out of a 14.5-inch barrel, you're looking at about 26 to 2650 FPS, which is still fairly fast. Now, that has a BC of, I believe, 0.51 on the G1 scale. Comparing that against a 22-inch .308 with 175 grain Sierra Match King, that's looking at about the same velocity with a slightly higher BC. Now, with the 120 grain AMAX at about 1,000 yards, you're looking at about 11 mils, which was where I was at with the 120 grain ELD Ms. I was using slightly different ammo, about 11 mils at 930 yards. And with the 22-inch .308 with 175 grain Sierra Match King, you're looking at about the same drop, more wind drift, and more recoil as well, because again, we're using a bullet that's almost 30% lighter out of the 6.5 Creedmor. Not to mention our 6.5 Creedmor build is 7.5 inches shorter, and depending on your barrel profile, probably about a half pound. And again, we're meeting or exceeding a 20 to 22-inch .308 with a much shorter, much lighter package. Now, moving up in grain weights to 142 grain Sierra Match King out of the 6.5 Creedmor with a 14.5-inch barrel, you're looking at about 24, maybe a little bit more. Again, it's going to depend on your specific loading of that bullet, but probably about 2,400 FPS. Now, your drop at 1,000 yards, this is where it's going to start to fall behind a little bit. The 20 and 22-inch .308s, you're probably looking at about 12 to 13 mils of total drop, which is a little bit more. Wind drift out of those super high BC 6.5 Creedmor bullets is about 20% less than the much longer, heavier .308 variant. So again, the point of this build is not to be the most effective and efficient length of 6.5 Creedmor, because of course we can just throw in a much longer barrel and be done with it. The point of this is to get an incredibly effective package that basically eliminates .308 in almost every scenario with a much shorter, lighter package. Now, the downside of 6.5 Creedmor is reduced barrel life. and that's it. You're looking at about half the barrel life of 6.5 Creedmoor versus 308, which is again still going to be somewhere between 5 and 10,000 rounds on a high quality barrel, whereas 308 can extend that barrel life between 10 and 20,000 rounds, again depending on what barrel, scenario, so on and so forth. So if you're looking for a good machine gun, that is an area where 308 can still be incredibly effective because you are going to have a little bit better barrel life, whereas 6.5 Creedmoor, to maintain that match level of accuracy, you're going to have a shorter barrel life. However, for me, that doesn't really matter because I'm not going to be putting 5 to 10,000 rounds to this. Now, some of you are probably thinking that ammo cost is a big problem on 6.5 Creedmoor. However, that's just not the case anymore in early 2024. As of right now, I am paying under $16 a box for SNB 140 grain FMJ, which is infinitely better than M80 ball, and M80 ball for 308 is running about $20 a box. So my training or inside of 500 yards ammo is much cheaper and much lighter recoiling, much more effective as well than something cheap and crappy like M80 ball that's designed to be fired out of a machine gun. And for match ammunition, I believe Callaway Ballistics is selling their 6.5 Creedmoor for about $26 a box, and the Hornady 120 grain ELD M's that I was shooting, I believe I got for about $31 or $32 a box, which is comparable, if not identical, to what you're going to be paying for 308. And again, performance per dollar is much higher on the 6.5 Creedmoor. Now, the benefits of 6.5 Creedmoor, as we've already gone over, are numerous. Per inch of barrel length, it's just a much more efficient and effective cartridge, much better at deflecting wind, less drop, again, depending on what specific bullet caliber and barrel that you're going with, but it's just a much more ballistically efficient round. And on top of being more ballistically efficient, it's also lighter recoiling, noticeably lighter than 308. At about 600 yards from a stable position, I was able to keep about 1 round per second on target, perfectly fine with 6.5 Creedmoor, and I could probably push it even faster. Now, recoil is a bit subjective. It's going to depend on what you're using, whether you're suppressed, whether you're using an adjustable gas block, which I currently am here, a muzzle brake, system weight, all of those sort of things are going to come into play. But again, apples to apples, 6.5 Creedmoor has less recoil than 308. The ammunition itself is also a little bit lighter, of course, which is kind of a side benefit. You're not really going to be carrying any more ammo because it fits in the same size magazines as 308. But for the same amount of ammo, it will, of course, be a little bit lighter. So more ballistically efficient, shorter package, lighter package, less recoil, same cost. The only downside, the only real downside is going to be that shorter barrel life. If I did manage to burn out one of these barrels, I would spend about 17 times as much on the ammo as I did for this very nice custom barrel. So while that is a thing, it really doesn't matter unless you're somebody with an extremely high round count and probably using it on a machine gun, which again is where 308 does shine. Now in my situation, I don't have a huge stockpile of 308 laying around. I basically only buy it when I need to test one of the uppers that I build. So for me, there is absolutely no reason to build a 16-inch 308, an 18-inch 308, a 20-inch 308, or even longer when this shorter, handier, lighter recoiling. When it comes down to actually putting rounds on targets and making effective hits, there's really no reason whatsoever in my mind to have a 308 versus a 6.5 Creedmoor, especially when you can make it a very short and handy package. And if the rumors are true and the NGSW program continues to slowly fall apart, we'll kind of see why a lot of these companies are coming out with these shorter 6.5 Creedmoor builds, as 6.8 Fury is kind of a meme. But with all that out of the way, guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. Please feel free to comment angrily and get into fights in the comments down below, as that does boost engagement. So with all that out of the way, guys, thank you once again for watching. I will see you in the next one. God bless.